The moment I heard my sister scream, I dropped the wine bottle. It shattered against the kitchen tiles, crimson splashing up the white cabinets like blood. It wasn't the kind of scream you mistake for excitement or even surprise. It was the kind that slashes through silence and slices into your spine. I ran barefoot, glass crunching beneath me, straight into the living room where my mother stood frozen, eyes wide as if her body had forgotten how to breathe. On the floor, my father lay motionless. He was still warm when I touched him. That was the strangest part, how someone could still carry heat and yet be completely gone. I don't remember the ambulance or the neighbors or even who made the call. All I remember is that everything after that moment came in static, muffled words, a funeral that smelled like lilies and dust, and the strange hollow in our house that nothing ever filled again. 3 weeks later, I came out. Not because I was ready, but because grief took away my filter. I had spent years crafting silences, dancing around words, editing myself for my family's comfort. But death does something cruel, it unzips you. I was sitting on the back steps, watching the rain blur the backyard lights, when I told my mother I was in love with a girl named Harper. Her face didn't change. No reaction, no gasp, no shattering of expectations, just a slow, deliberate exhale. Then she stood up and walked inside. She didn't speak to me for 4 days. And when she finally did, it was only to ask if I'd be home for dinner. We never talked about Harper again. Harper, though, she became my compass. She was everything I wasn't: impulsive, loud, borderline chaotic. She laughed with her whole body, the kind of laugh that embarrassed you in public but healed something broken in private. I met her in a grief support group. I had gone because the school counselor insisted, probably worried I'd drop out. She had gone because someone dared her. She said that in front of the whole group, like it was a comedy open mic. I hated her instantly. And yet I couldn't stop staring. She had this wild, curly hair and eyes that flickered between blue and green depending on the light or maybe on her mood. I thought she was everything I was supposed to avoid, but grief made us reckless, and something about her laugh made me feel like I was still alive. The twist came the night I tried to ghost her. I had decided I wasn't ready for another loss. She was too bright, too much, and I was still full of shadows. I blocked her number, deleted our texts, ignored the ache. That night she showed up at my door soaking wet from the rain, wearing an orange hoodie and no makeup, holding a stack of postcards. "These are all the places I wanted to take you," she said, voice trembling like she hadn't rehearsed it in her head 100 times. "But I'll burn them if you tell me to. I need to know if you laughed because you meant it or because you were scared." And just like that, the rain wasn't the only thing that cracked me open. I pulled her inside, barefoot and broken, and we laughed until sunrise. The days after that night with Harper blurred together in a rush of reckless joy. She made me forget what it was like to feel trapped by my own thoughts. We didn't go on grand dates or make plans for the future. Instead, we had moments, tiny fragments of pure, unexpected connection. Like when she dragged me to the late-night diner on a Tuesday because she had an irresistible craving for waffle fries drenched in ranch, and I couldn't help but laugh at how serious she was about it. Or when she convinced me to go skinny dipping in a lake on a day that should have been too cold to even think about swimming. I thought I'd be mortified, but with her beside me, the world felt suddenly bigger, more forgiving. She was and always would be a force of nature. But there was a quiet tension, too. In the midst of every laugh, every spontaneous adventure, there was a moment when the weight of everything we'd been through would settle between us, thick and unspoken. Harper was so unapologetically free that it scared me. How could someone who had experienced their own heartache be so open, so willing to trust? And yet each time she cracked a joke or spun an outrageous story, I found myself wanting more. But I wasn't ready to take more. I had convinced myself that I couldn't hold on to something so wild. I didn't know how to navigate the space between what I wanted and what I thought I could handle. I was still reeling from my father's death, still watching my family crumble in ways I couldn't explain. My mother had become a shell, retreating further into silence. My sister, a girl who used to be the loudest in the room, had started to lose herself in textbooks and empty hours, like she was afraid that being seen might mean falling apart. And I was afraid of love, afraid of how it could slip through my fingers like sand and leave me with nothing but a lingering ache. But when Harper's laugh cracked through my defenses, even I couldn't deny that I was falling. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't a slow burn. It was sudden and explosive, like an eruption I wasn't prepared for. And yet each time I tried to pull away, Harper would chase after me, catching me in the spaces between my own hesitations. Then one night, as we lay on her rooftop staring up at a sky that felt too big to comprehend, she asked me a question that stopped everything cold. "Why do you always look at me like I'm about to disappear?" she said, her voice steady but gentle, like she already knew the answer. I could feel the lump in my throat growing, the rush of anxiety threatening to choke me. I wasn't ready to tell her the truth, not yet, but I couldn't lie either. Because I'm afraid you will, I finally said, my words cracking on the edges. Harper didn't respond right away. She simply turned to face me, her eyes soft but searching. I won't disappear, she said, her hand finding mine in the dark. But you can't keep running from what's right in front of you. And just like that, something shifted between us. It wasn't that everything was perfect. It wasn't that I knew what the future held. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe love didn't have to be about certainty or control. Maybe it was about the way you laughed together in the middle of the storm, finding light even in the chaos. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of messy, tender moments, times when I felt like I was floating and falling at the same time. Harper didn't ask for my past, didn't demand explanations for the things I couldn't explain myself. She just was in the most glorious, unapologetic way. But as much as she kept showing up, pulling me from the dark corners of my mind, I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was living on borrowed time. My heart was a house built on shaky foundations, and I was terrified that one wrong step would bring it all crashing down. There was a part of me, an ugly, cowardly part, that was convinced that the universe would eventually come knocking, ready to remind me that love wasn't meant for people like me, that happiness wasn't something we were allowed to hold for long. Harper, though, refused to let me hide. She would show up unannounced, knocking on my door at 2 a.m. with takeout, a new comedy special on Netflix, and a grin that made everything feel possible. "Come on," she'd say, "you can't be this sad while I'm here." It was impossible to resist her, impossible not to laugh, even on days when I felt like I was drowning. There was one night in particular when I was wrapped in the suffocating grip of a panic attack, my chest tight and my mind racing. Harper had arrived just in time. She didn't ask me what was wrong, didn't try to fix it. Instead, she sat beside me in silence, rubbing my back and telling me the most ridiculous story about her childhood pet iguana, who, according to Harper, had a deep existential crisis after being mistaken for a chicken nugget at a family barbecue. Her laughter was contagious, and by the time I stopped crying, my sides hurt from laughing too. But in that laughter, there was healing. In that ridiculous story, there was love. The twist came the following weekend when I found a letter. It was buried deep inside my mailbox, crammed between junk mail and a bank statement. At first, I thought it was just another bill, another reminder of how tight our family's finances had become after my father's passing. But when I opened it, my stomach twisted. The letter was from the same grief support group where I had met Harper. At the top, in bold letters, were the words, "Final session announcement, your family's complicated grief process." The letter stated that, due to funding issues, the group would be ending sooner than expected, and that participants were encouraged to finish up any unresolved personal issues before closure. A chill ran down my spine as I read the lines again, my eyes scanning for any hint that Harper had known. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I called Harper immediately, the phone ringing 4 times before she picked up. Her voice was warm and comforting as always, but there was something different in the way she spoke that night. "Hey, what's up?" she asked, almost too casually. I wanted to scream at her, demand to know what she knew, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself asking a question I wasn't sure I was ready to face. "Harper, are you still planning on leaving?" The pause on the other end of the line was agonizing. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than usual, almost hesitant. "I'm not leaving, but I think you already know that, right? I've been here, I'm not going anywhere." And yet in that moment, the weight of what I hadn't said, what I had been too afraid to say, pressed down on me harder than anything before. Was I really ready to live a life where I didn't have to run away from love, where I could laugh with her, trust her, and let her in? Could I let someone in so deeply, knowing that I might fall apart again someday? The answer, of course, was yes. But it would take everything I had to let go of the fear that had held me hostage for so long. I didn't know it then, but that phone call marked the turning point. It was the first time I said aloud, "I'm not ready to lose you." And for all the courage it took to admit that, it wasn't the words themselves that mattered, it was the way they landed between us. Harper, as always, understood the unspoken. She didn't need me to explain why it was so hard to trust, why I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff every time she looked at me with that mischievous smile that said she knew everything about me, everything I was afraid of. She didn't push me to be better or faster or braver. She simply stayed, and in her stillness I learned how to stay too. The next few days were a whirlwind of small revelations. I found myself thinking about how much we had already been through, the ridiculousness of trying to control something as wild as love. I kept replaying our moments together, those odd, spontaneous adventures that felt like everything and nothing at the same time. I found myself smiling in places I hadn't smiled before, in the middle of a crowded grocery store or while waiting for the bus, or even as I sat in the stillness of my room, staring at the letter that had almost made me run. There were whispers of hope in those moments. They didn't erase the grief or the fear or the questions that I wasn't ready to answer, but they gave me something to hold on to when everything else felt too heavy. Then one evening just after dusk, Harper showed up at my door with an envelope in hand. She was standing in the glow of the street lamp, her face half shadowed and half lit, looking like some strange, beautiful apparition. I had no idea what it was, but I could feel the gravity of the moment, the unspoken tension that had built between us over the past few weeks. She handed me the envelope wordlessly, her eyes fixed on mine as if she were trying to read me, trying to understand everything I hadn't said. I took it, my hands trembling slightly, but I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I stepped back and let her inside. We sat on the couch, the space between us crackling with anticipation, with everything we were too scared to voice. "I know what you're thinking," she said finally, breaking the silence, "and you're right to think it. I've been thinking the same thing, but we don't have to rush. We don't have to make decisions we're not ready for." Her voice was soft, but there was a steadiness to it, as though she had already made peace with the uncertainty. "I just want you to know this isn't a game for me. I've been here, I'm still here. But I don't want to leave you behind if you're not ready to be here with me." Her eyes searched mine, and for the first time in a long while I didn't look away. I didn't feel like I had to. I opened the envelope slowly, heart pounding, and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. At first glance, I thought it was just another letter, a note to add to the stack of things I hadn't yet dealt with. But then I saw it. At the top of the page, in bold, beautiful handwriting, were the words, "This is where I am. Will you come with me?" It was a map, not a literal one, but something far more precious, an invitation. It was a map of all the places Harper had promised to take me: the beach at dawn, the rooftop bar with the best sunset view, the spot on the trail where we could watch the stars without anyone else around. But more than that, it was a map to her. To everything we could be if I was brave enough to hold on to the laughter, the trust, and the love we had started to build one moment at a time. And just like that, the last walls I had carefully built around my heart crumbled. The only thing left was the question I had been afraid to ask for too long: could I love her without losing myself? Could I trust her without the shadow of fear making every step feel like an anchor? The truth was, I didn't have all the answers. But with her laughter in my ears, her hand in mine, I realized that maybe the answers didn't matter. Because love, like laughter, wasn't about knowing exactly what would happen next. It was about showing up together one moment at a time. The map Harper had given me wasn't just a guide to places, it became a symbol of everything we had yet to discover together. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that it wasn't about the destinations. It was about the journey, about letting ourselves be swept up in the chaos of life without trying to control the direction. Every laugh, every moment we shared was a step toward something new. In a world that often tried to define us by the things we couldn't control: loss, family expectations, fear of the future, we were learning how to define ourselves through what we could hold on to, each other, and the endless possibilities that laughter could bring. Harper and I didn't make promises that night. We didn't sign contracts or make grand declarations about the future, because we both knew that love, in its purest form, wasn't about guarantees. It was about taking risks, showing up when it's hard, and finding joy in the unpredictable. It was something raw and imperfect, something that could be rebuilt every day with a little bit of trust and a lot of grace. So we continued the way we had before, letting the laughter lead us wherever it wanted to take us. The first place we visited on Harper's map was the beach at dawn. It wasn't grand or cinematic, the sky was overcast and the waves barely reached the shore, but we didn't need anything spectacular. All we needed was each other, standing barefoot in the sand, our feet sinking into the cool earth as we whispered about everything and nothing. We laughed about the way the ocean mist made our hair look like wet seaweed, and the ridiculous way we tried to race each other to the water, only to end up falling and laughing until we couldn't breathe. The sound of our laughter, so genuine and so free, became a soundtrack for what was unfolding between us. A soundtrack that, in hindsight, I realized was the only thing that mattered. When we reached the second stop on her map, the rooftop bar with the best sunset view, I found myself holding her hand tighter than I had before, as if the sheer act of holding on was enough to steady the storm of questions swirling inside my mind. Could we really make this work? Could love be enough when it felt like the world was pulling in so many different directions? As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Harper leaned over and kissed me softly, but with a promise in it. Not a promise of forever, because who could know what forever would look like, but a promise to keep showing up one laugh at a time, and in that kiss I understood everything. It wasn't about having all the answers. It was about choosing to stay in the moments that felt right, even when you had no idea what the next chapter would bring. And then the final stop on Harper's map, the stars on the quiet trail. We didn't need to speak as we lay side by side on the soft earth, the cool night air swirling around us, but we didn't need words. Harper's hand brushed against mine, and I found myself tracing the lines of her fingers, memorizing the feel of them. In that moment, I understood why she'd made this map for us. It wasn't to plan out our life together. It wasn't about control or certainty. It was simply about showing me that I didn't need to have everything figured out to be happy. That love wasn't about avoiding the darkness, but about being brave enough to laugh in the light, to trust in the spaces between where we stood and where we were going. I looked at Harper in the soft glow of the stars and realized that in learning to love her, I had learned how to love myself. I wasn't fixed, wasn't perfect, wasn't even remotely ready for everything life would throw at me. But I was here, fully here in this moment of pure, unfiltered love, one laugh at a time. And for the first time in my life, I felt like that was enough.